The waiter's voice cut through the low hum of the restaurant, a simple question that stopped me dead in my tracks. His eyes flicked from her to me, and then back again, a quiet recognition lingering in the air. "Would you like the usual, miss?" he asked, his tone casual, but his gaze held something more, something I couldn't quite place. I watched her stiffen, just for a second. She barely missed a beat before her smile slipped into place. "Yes, please," she replied, the words so smooth, so practiced. But the moment felt like a crack in the facade, a brief window into something she wasn't ready to let me see. It wasn't the usual dinner routine. This wasn't just a quiet evening at a favorite spot, the kind of place where everything felt safe and predictable. No, there was something about the way the waiter had said it, the usual, that hit me like a bolt of lightning. The way she'd been here before. With him. I glanced at her across the table, but she was already busy with her menu, avoiding my eyes. I could feel the tension start to coil in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't jealousy, exactly. It was more like an intrusion, an uncomfortable familiarity I didn't belong to. It wasn't lost on me that I wasn't the one she had shared this usual with. The fact that the waiter knew it, without even needing to ask, made my chest tighten. It was a simple question, but it felt like a silent invitation into something I wasn't sure I was ready for. She had never mentioned this before, not once. The place, the usual, all of it. I wasn't sure if she thought I wouldn't notice, or if she was just too busy keeping her past tucked away, somewhere I couldn't reach. I wanted to ask, to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. The smile on her face, that mask of comfort, told me I wasn't supposed to ask. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The waiter, clearly sensing the tension he had stirred, gave a polite nod and walked away without another word. But the moment had already passed, and the feeling lingered like smoke in the air, thick and suffocating. I tried to focus on the menu in front of me, but my thoughts kept circling back to what I had just witnessed. I could see the edges of a story I wasn't part of, one that she had lived before me. I couldn't help but wonder how many SS there had been before this one, how many times had she sat here, in this very spot, with someone else, feeling the same warmth of familiarity in the air? The usual, that little phrase, now felt like a heavy weight between us. She still hadn't looked up. Her fingers traced the edge of her glass, lost in thought, but not lost enough to forget herself. I watched her, this woman who had once seemed so open, so easy to read, now distant, guarded in a way I had never noticed before. I had thought we were close, that I knew her better than anyone. But now, there was something I didn't know. And maybe it wasn't even something she had ever shared. "How long has this been your usual?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Her eyes flicked up, sharp and calculating. "What do you mean?" she asked, a little too quickly, like she wasn't sure if she wanted me to dig any deeper. I swallowed, the uncomfortable truth settling in my chest. "The usual," I clarified, my voice lower now, cautious. "The one the waiter mentioned. You've been here before. With someone else, I'm guessing. How long has that been, your usual?" For a split second, I thought she might say something. The silence stretched thin between us, and for the first time in the months we'd been together, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't sure I could cross. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted away, to the soft glow of the restaurant lights, to the hum of conversations around us. For a moment, it felt like she was trying to pretend the question hadn't been asked, that I wasn't even here. But then, just as I was about to apologize for being too forward, she finally spoke. "It's just a place I used to come with someone," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "Before. It doesn't mean anything, really." But I could hear it in her voice, the hesitation, the quiet lingering in the spaces between her words. I could tell that it meant something to her. Maybe it was the memories attached to this place, or the idea of what this usual represented. Either way, the moment felt like a veil had been lifted, just slightly. But there was so much more I didn't understand. Was it serious? The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for her response. What was I hoping for? Reassurance? The truth? She glanced at me then, her expression unreadable, and for a long moment, I wasn't sure if she was going to answer. But then she sighed, a deep exhale that felt like she was letting something go. "It was a long time ago," she said, finally looking at me. Her eyes softened, but there was something guarded there. "And it doesn't matter now." It felt like she was trying to reassure me, but all I could feel was the distance that had grown in the space between us. The more she tried to downplay it, the more it felt like she was hiding something. Something that she wasn't ready to share. Does it still matter to you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, not sure I even wanted to hear the answer. For a moment, she didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at the menu again, as if the question itself had unsettled her. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, almost apologetic. I don't know, she said, almost as if she were talking to herself. Maybe. Maybe not. But this, she gestured vaguely at the space around us, at the table, at the restaurant. It's just a place, just a moment in time. It doesn't define anything. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to say that I was fine with it, that I understood. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing in the middle of a story that wasn't mine. That maybe there were parts of her past that I didn't belong in, parts one wasn't meant to know. And yet, I couldn't let go of the question that was hanging between us, unspoken but powerful. The waiter returned with her drink, breaking the silence, and she thanked him with a smile. But even as she lifted the glass to her lips, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing, that whatever had been between us before, whatever connection we'd shared, was shifting in ways I wasn't prepared for. Her past was still there, lingering, casting shadows over the present. And as much as I wanted to reach across the table, to close the gap between us, I couldn't help but wonder, was I even supposed to know about it? And so, we sat there, across from each other, the weight of unsaid things pressing down on us, the uncomfortable knowledge that there was more she hadn't shared, and the quiet realization that I had just begun to scratch the surface. The rest of the evening passed in a strange, strained silence. The clink of silverware, the murmur of other diners, the soft hum of conversation, all of it felt distant, like we were in a different world. I kept glancing at her, trying to read her expression, but she had slipped behind that familiar mask again, her smile polite, her eyes distant. I had thought I knew her better than anyone, but tonight, it felt like I was sitting across from someone I barely recognized. The food came, the waiter delivering our orders with the practiced ease of someone who had seen 100 couples like us, sitting across from each other, pretending that everything was fine. But I wasn't pretending. I couldn't. I kept thinking back to the way the waiter had asked about her usual, how easily he had said it, like it was just another part of his job. But to me, it felt like a sharp reminder of everything I wasn't a part of. I wanted to ask more. To demand answers. I wanted to dig deeper, to understand the meaning behind the usual and what it had been for her, but something held me back. She was already closed off, her walls back up after that brief moment of vulnerability. The last thing I wanted to do was push her away even more. I chewed my food slowly, my stomach in knots. She ate without looking up, without acknowledging the tension that was hanging in the air. It was like she was somewhere else, lost in her thoughts, while I sat there, trying to piece together the fragments of our conversation. I felt like an intruder in a space I wasn't meant to be in, like I had caught a glimpse of something I wasn't supposed to see, and now everything had changed. I didn't mean to make things weird, she said suddenly, her voice breaking through the silence. I looked up, surprised, to see that her face was flushed, her gaze still not meeting mine. She had said the words so quietly, like she was afraid I might not hear them, but I did. I wanted to respond, to tell her that it wasn't her fault, that I was the one who had made things uncomfortable by asking in the first place. But the words didn't come. Instead, I just nodded, trying to force a smile that felt more like a grimace. You didn't, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. I wasn't expecting that. To hear you had been here with someone else. It caught me off guard. She took a sip of her wine, her fingers trembling slightly around the glass. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to keep it from you. It's not something I really talk about. It was a long time ago. Her words hung in the air between us, each one feeling like it carried more weight than it should. I wanted to press her on it, to ask why she had never mentioned it, but I knew it wouldn't help. She had already closed herself off again, retreating behind the wall she had built. I get it, I said, though the words felt hollow. I understand. But I need you to know that I'm not upset, okay? She nodded quickly, her lips pressed into a thin line. I don't want to hurt you, she said, the words barely above a whisper. I know, I said, my voice softer now. I reached across the table, my hand brushing against hers. She didn't pull away, but she didn't take my hand either. It was like she was unsure of what she wanted, unsure of how to let me in when there was so much she had kept hidden. I could feel the space between us widening again, the gulf of unspoken things that neither of us was willing to face. We ate the rest of our meal in silence, the noise of the restaurant continuing around us, a stark contrast to the stillness between us. The moments that should have felt intimate, the soft exchange of glances, the shared jokes, the quiet understanding that passed between us, were replaced by a silence that felt like a chasm we were both too afraid to cross. When the check arrived, she grabbed it before I could reach for it, her fingers brushing mine briefly as she signed her name. It was a small gesture, but it made me feel like she was distancing herself even further. She paid quickly, and as we stood up to leave, she didn't look at me. She just walked ahead, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. I followed her, feeling like I was walking in the shadow of something I couldn't quite touch. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, the weight of the conversation still hanging between us like a cloud. We walked toward the car in silence, the only sound the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. I wanted to say something, to break the silence, but I didn't know what. What could I say that wouldn't make things worse? What could I ask that would bring us back from this place where we had so abruptly found ourselves? As we reached the car, she finally turned to face me. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else there too. Something I couldn't quite place. "I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I don't know how to fix this." I felt my heart twist in my chest. I wanted to tell her that we would figure it out, that we could find a way back to what we had. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure if we could fix this. I wasn't sure if I even knew how. "We'll figure it out," I said, the words leaving my mouth without thinking. "We just need to be honest with each other. And we need to take things one step at a time." She nodded, her lips trembling slightly. I wanted to take her hand, to hold her close, but something held me back. I wasn't sure if it was the fear of pushing too hard or the fear that we were already too far gone. "We'll see," she whispered, her eyes downcast. She opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat before I could say anything else. I stood there for a moment, watching her, my thoughts swirling around me like a storm I couldn't control. When she started the engine, I climbed into the passenger seat beside her, the air between us thick with unspoken words. We drove home in silence, the streetlights casting fleeting shadows on the road ahead. As we pulled into the driveway, I knew something had changed. The comfortable silence we had once shared, the easy connection we had built, was gone. It was replaced by something else, something heavier, something uncertain. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew we couldn't keep pretending. We had to face what was between us. And I wasn't sure if we were ready for that yet. The days after that dinner felt like a fog, thick and unyielding, hanging around us wherever we went. Everything felt muted, as though the world had shifted into grayscale. The weight of the silence between us was more tangible now, like a living, breathing thing that refused to leave. We were both pretending. Pretending that things were fine when they were anything but. Every small gesture, every word spoken, felt like it was being filtered through an invisible wall. She was distant again, but in a way that felt more calculated. She smiled, but it was tight, rehearsed. She was there, but she wasn't. And I could see it in the way she held herself, in the way she looked away when I tried to catch her eye. I knew she was holding something back. She had been for a long time, but now the gap between us seemed wider than ever. I thought about our conversation during dinner, about the usual, about the way she had reacted. How it had rattled her, even though she had tried so hard to act like it hadn't. I didn't know what was going on in her head, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop wondering how much of her past I didn't know, how much she was still keeping hidden from me. I had tried to push it all aside, to pretend that it didn't matter, but it did. It mattered more than I cared to admit. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was standing at the edge of something, a place I couldn't quite cross. And the more I thought about the past, her past, this place, this usual, the more I realized how little I truly understood about her. It was late one evening when she returned home, a little later than usual. She slipped in quietly, as if trying not to disturb the stillness in the house. I was sitting on the couch, absently flipping through a book, pretending to be absorbed, pretending to not care. But I couldn't focus on anything. Not with the silence growing heavier between us, not with the weight of everything we hadn't said. She stopped in the doorway for a moment, her hand still on the doorknob. I didn't look up at first, afraid that if I did, I might say something I wasn't ready to hear. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice low and hesitant. I glanced up, finding her standing there, her eyes searching mine, as if waiting for permission to continue. She didn't seem like herself. She was holding herself stiffly, like she was bracing for something. "I think it's time we talk about it," she said finally, her words heavy with meaning. "About what's been going on. About us." I sat up straighter, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment we would finally face what had been tearing us apart. But part of me was afraid. Afraid of what she would say. Afraid of what we would discover when we finally peeled back all the layers we had been hiding behind. But I couldn't let fear hold me back anymore. "I've been thinking a lot too," I said quietly, my voice trembling slightly. "And I think it's time we stop pretending." She nodded, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the conversation had finally caught up to her. She walked over to the couch and sat down beside me, a few inches of space still between us, but it was the closest we had been in days. I could feel her presence beside me, but it felt like there was still a chasm between us, something we hadn't yet crossed. "I don't want you to think I'm hiding anything from you," she started, her voice shaky. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to make you understand." I reached out, placing my hand on hers. Her skin was warm, but there was a slight tremble in her fingers, a sign of the tension in her body. "You don't have to explain everything all at once," I said softly. "But we can't keep going on like this, pretending everything's okay when it's not." She looked at me then, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "I know," she whispered. "I've been scared. I've been scared to lose you. But I don't know if I'm ready to let you in fully. I don't know if I can." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't show it. I knew this wasn't about me. This was about her, about the past she hadn't shared with me, about the things that still lingered in her heart that I didn't understand. She was afraid, and I could see it in her eyes, afraid of losing me, afraid of how much of herself she would have to expose to let me truly in. "You don't have to be ready," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But I need to know what's holding you back. I need to understand what you're afraid of." She hesitated, her eyes darting away as if she was trying to find the words. She opened her mouth a few times, but nothing came out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "I think I've been holding on to something," she said, her voice barely audible. "Someone, really. And I haven't been able to let go of that part of me. The part of me that was with him." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. She had said it. The thing I had been afraid to hear. He. The man she had been with before me. The one who had shared this usual with her. The one who still had a hold on her heart, even though she hadn't said his name in months. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I held myself back. I wanted to understand, even though it hurt. I wanted to be the one she was choosing, but I needed to know how much of the past she was still carrying with her. "He's a part of me I haven't let go of," she continued, her voice trembling now. "I know I should, but I don't know how. He was part of my life for so long, and sometimes it feels like I'm still holding onto those memories. But I don't know how to let them go without losing a piece of myself." The pain in her voice was palpable, and I realized then that this wasn't about me. It wasn't even about us. This was about her struggle to reconcile who she had been with who she was now, about the ghost of a past love that still haunted her in ways I had never understood. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her eyes welling with tears. "But I don't know how to move forward when I'm still holding on to something I can't let go of." I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I was scared too. I was scared that she would never truly let go of the past. I was scared that I would never be enough to replace the usual with someone else. But I knew I couldn't leave her now, not when she was this vulnerable, not when she was finally letting me see the part of her she had been hiding for so long. "We'll figure it out," I said softly, squeezing her hand. "Together. One step at a time." And even though I wasn't sure what the future held for us, I knew this much: we couldn't keep pretending. We couldn't keep living in the shadow of the past. If we were going to make this work, we had to be willing to face the truth, all of it. The next few weeks felt like a delicate balancing act. She and I tiptoed around each other, trying to navigate this fragile space we had found ourselves in. We didn't have all the answers, not yet, but we were both trying to understand, trying to heal, trying to build something real out of the rawness of everything we had just uncovered. I didn't push her. Not right away. The weight of her words, about the past, about holding on to someone who had once been such an integral part of her life, lingered in my mind. I wasn't angry. I wasn't frustrated. I understood that she wasn't ready to completely let go of everything. And if I was honest with myself, I wasn't ready to let go of her, either. What scared me the most was not that there was another man before me. It was the idea that there might be a version of her that I couldn't reach, a part of her that was forever tethered to the past. It was hard to look at her and not feel like I was competing with a memory, with something that had already been woven into the fabric of her being. But I didn't want to make it about him. Not anymore. I wanted to make it about us. Each evening, we would spend time together, but it wasn't always easy. Sometimes, we would sit in silence, both of us absorbed in our own thoughts, the distance between us growing like an unspoken wall. Other times, we would talk, but the conversation would feel too fragile, as though one wrong word could shatter everything we were trying to build. One night, as I was sitting on the couch flipping through a book, she sat down beside me, a little closer than usual. Her body language had softened over the past few days, but there was still a hesitance in her eyes. She wasn't looking at me, but I could feel her presence beside me, as if she were waiting for me to say something. Waiting for the next step, the next move. "I've been thinking," she said softly, finally breaking the silence. "I know I've been distant, and I know you're probably confused about what I want. But I want to be honest with you." My heart beat faster, but I didn't want to interrupt her. I wanted her to speak, to say whatever was on her mind. If we were going to move forward, we had to do it together, with everything laid out in the open. I think I've been holding on to the idea of who I used to be. And that's not fair to you, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. I've been trying to figure out how to move forward, but I kept looking back. And I know that's not healthy. Not for either of us. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and I saw the pain in her eyes. This wasn't about me. This wasn't about our relationship. This was about her. She was trying to reconcile the person she had been with the person she was becoming, and I understood that. I had been trying to do the same thing, in my own way. We were both trying to grow, to shed old parts of ourselves that no longer fit. But it was hard. So damn hard. "I don't want to lose you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I don't want you to be trapped by something that's not here anymore. I want to build something with you. Something real." She reached out then, her hand resting lightly on mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the most honest thing we had shared in a while. "I know," she said softly. "And I want that too. But I need time. Time to let go of the past and to focus on what we have. What we could have." I nodded, understanding. "I'm here. Whenever you're ready. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace settle in my chest. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't an answer. But it was a step forward. We were no longer pretending. We were finally letting each other in. It wasn't easy. There were still nights when the silence between us felt too heavy, when the doubts crept in, whispering that maybe this wasn't going to work. But there were also moments of closeness, moments where I could feel the foundation we were building starting to take root. It was slow. It was painful at times. But it was real. One evening, a few weeks later, we found ourselves back at that restaurant. The same one where everything had shifted. The same one where the waiter had asked her about her usual. But this time, it felt different. The weight wasn't there anymore. We had spoken about the past, about the things that had kept us apart, and now we were looking forward, together. The waiter, who had once recognized her with such ease, approached the table with the same polite smile. "The usual, miss?" he asked, his eyes flicking between us as if he could sense the change. She smiled back at him, a real smile this time, and then turned to me. "Actually, we'll try something new," she said. And for the first time, I saw a spark of excitement in her eyes. It was the same excitement I had seen years ago, the excitement of trying something different, of stepping outside the past and into the future. The waiter nodded and walked away, but I didn't miss the small shift in the air. It wasn't the usual. It was something new. And that felt like the beginning of something beautiful. We spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, for the first time in a long time. We shared our hopes, our fears, our dreams for the future. There was no pretense, no walls between us. Just honesty. Just the two of us, working through the things we hadn't said, discovering who we were now, who we could be together. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if everything would work out perfectly or if we would still face challenges ahead. But for the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. We were ready to try, to move forward, to create a future built on trust, honesty, and a willingness to let go of the things that had held us back. And as we left the restaurant that night, walking hand in hand, I realized that sometimes, it's not about the past or the mistakes we've made. It's about what we choose to do with the present, the moments we share now, and the future we build together. And with her by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next.